Hi, I'm Mr. Lauer, and in this video we're going to be putting together a table saw. So a while ago I got a new SawStop table saw. If you haven't seen the unboxing video, it's up here somewhere. You should go check it out. It's pretty cool. In this video I'm going to show you how I put everything together, so stick around, check it out.
The first thing I want to point out is that the instructions and the hardware packs are all nicely color-coded, so it's really easy to see which part goes with which step. According to the directions, we're going to need a few tools. Once I've read through the rules, I can hit the ground running. I start by assembling the base. I'm going to need to lay out all of the black anodized legs and braces just to make sure I have everything. This is going to be a common theme throughout the build, but anytime you're bolting together pieces, you want to make sure that you're not tightening them all the way. Tighten them just enough to get them together, but don't tighten them fully. Once you've assembled all the pieces, then you can go back and tighten all the bolts. It just makes it come together a lot better that way. The stand is starting to take shape. Now it's time to put on the braces. These little adjustable rubber feet get bolted into the bottom of the stand. These feet are going to help us level our saw when it's all put together.
I've got the stand done, and I need to attach it to the table saw itself. The instructions say to get a helper and put the stand up and lift the table saw onto it. What I'm going to try to do is mount the stand onto the table saw upside down while it's in the box, and then try and flip it back up the other way. Let's cross our fingers and hope for the best. That's it for the rest of the box. It's really important to make sure that you don't A, injure yourself, and B, damage your new piece of equipment. So according to the next set of instructions here, we need to tighten all of the bolts that we didn't tighten the first time. So let's get to it. So this next part, some of you guys are really going to like. We get a little ASMR going with taking off this film. Your table saw is going to come pre-packaged with this grease over the cast iron surface, and that's there to protect it during shipping and storage against rust and corrosion. The instructions say to use a clean rag, and you can just start wiping it off. If you find that the packaging grease is too thick, there's too much of it, and you're having a tough time getting it off, some WD-40 works really great as a degreaser, and that's going to protect your surface pretty well. But this looks like it's a pretty light oil, so we shouldn't really have to do too much to it. Make sure you get it off the sides too and the ends. Ooh, that's gorgeous. Next up, we're going to install hand wheels.
So it turns out this little thing is a spacer for the wheel. So that goes on first. Then here's the wheel. It's keyed to one side, that means it's got a flat spot, so it goes on straight and stays on. And it's secured by a star knob thing. This is the wheel for the side that controls the tilting action of the blade. It assembles pretty much the same way. Next up, I'm installing the motor. It goes on with a couple of pins pretty easily, and then we tighten them in with some Allen wrenches. Next up is the belt cover. I actually had a little trouble getting this one on because the nuts were actually a little smaller than the socket wrenches I had, so I had to use a regular crescent wrench, which is a little tricky, but it eventually worked. Then we're going to mount the belt. The motor has a spring to it, which makes it really easy to get this belt mounted on. And that's pretty much it for mounting the motor. Oh, don't forget to plug it in.
According to the instructions, the next part we need to put on are the extension wings.
Putting on the cast iron extension wings is a little bit tricky if you've only got one person. I mean, they are pretty heavy, so what I ended up doing was I took a piece of straight oak dowel that I had lying around, and I just clamped it in a couple of places to use as a ledger board, and it actually worked out pretty well. The first bolt is probably the toughest, but once you get that one in there, everything else lines up quite nicely. I ended up doing the same trick with the wooden ledger board as the first wing. For some reason, this first bolt ended up being really difficult to put in, so I just moved on to the next bolt hole, and everything else seemed to line up pretty well after that. Not sure what happened there, but hey, it ended up coming together in the end. That's what matters. So one thing you have to do before you tighten all the bolts is make sure that your side wings are aligned straight and flat with the rest of your table. To do that, I ended up clamping the big rail tube to either side, and that did a pretty good job of making sure everything was lined up properly. Just to be on the safe side, my neighbor lent me his flat bar gauge, and everything's pretty flat and straight, reasonably so. As my father would have said, good enough for government work. We just repeat the process for both sides and tighten the bolts as we go. There, flat all around.
Next up, we're installing rails. We're going to be using the hardware from this red pack.
Honestly, this part went really smoothly. All of the bolt holes for the rails are countersunk, which means everything lines up perfectly. Now we're going to do the same thing for the back rail. Moving right along, we're going to need to install the rest of the extension table. This little part is a leveler that helps even out the surface between the phenolithic top and your cast iron wings. It goes on pretty easily. The phenolic top should fit in there with a little bit of friction. That's actually a good thing. So you may need to push and pull a little bit to get it to set right. Next, we've got a couple sets of bolts just to line everything up. Make sure you don't tighten things down until you're done with all the rest of the steps. Next up, we're mounting the legs. First thing we're going to do is screw in the leveling feet. Make sure you put a nut on first, and then screw the feet all the way into the end of the legs. The legs get mounted into these triangle brackets. Oh, I forgot to mention, I put on triangle brackets. Whoopsie. One thing you're going to notice, and it does say so in the instructions, is that the holes for mounting the legs are slightly different from the front to the back. This is actually okay. It's really not that big a deal. Everything still lines up correctly, but in case you notice that and you don't realize that it's supposed to be like that, it might cause you some confusion. So don't worry too much about it. The fence rail, it's a little bit tricky. The instructions do a really good job of explaining what to do, but unfortunately I didn't get a great shot of really adjusting this thing. Long story short is, like anything, make sure that you put in all the bolts loose at first and then tighten them only when you're sure that you have everything in place. In the future, I'll be making a video on some of the fine-tuning and adjustments that you can do with this saw, and adjusting the fence will be part of that video. Before I forget, I want to make sure that my zero clearance insert is aligned perfectly with the surface of my cast iron table. Underneath the table are a couple of handy hooks for hanging our hardware, and our push sticks. Also, your miter gauge fits under here too. Now we're going to mount on the control box. This one got a little bit tricky because in the corner I couldn't actually fit my socket wrench, so I had to just tighten it with a crescent wrench. It was slow, but it did get the job done. With the control box in place, that's pretty much it. This saw is ready to run. Look at that beautiful machine. Isn't it gorgeous?
I will say to anyone who will listen, I love these saws. And I'm not paid to say that, I just love the product. Everything comes out of the box pretty well lined up, and anything that's not aligned right, you can adjust. As far as table saws go, I highly recommend them for your shop. But if you know anything about the SawStop, where it really shines is the automatic sensor braking system, which will stop a saw blade in a fraction of a second, faster than you or I can even react. If you haven't seen the hot dog video, go see the hot dog video. It's pretty cool. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you leave a like with the like button, a subscribe with the subscribe button, and leave a comment in the comments section. Until next time, I'm Mr. Lauer. Thanks for watching.